estamos aquí con Rufus Wainwright, compositor y cantautor estadounidense-canadiense. En 2018 estrenó su segunda ópera, Hadrian, en Canadá, y este verano la estrena en España, concretamente el 29 de julio, en el Festival de Peralada, con la orquesta y coro titulares del Teatro Real. Hello, Rufus, welcome. Thanks for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
How are you?
I'm good. It's great to be in Spain.
Good. So let's start with the interview. And the first question that I prepared for you is about Verdis Requiem.
Yes.
That was the piece which changed your way to being and seeing music. With this piece, you discovered the world of opera.
Yeah.
Tell us about this moment and how has your relationship with classical opera evolved since that?
Yeah, no, that was definitely the touchstone, shall we say, for my operatic passions. I kind of appreciated classical music in general as a small child. Like I loved Chopin, loved hearing, my mother would play Bach on the piano, and it sounded beautiful, but I didn't really, understand it. I was more into, popular music. But when I was about 13, my mother and my aunt, they bought a recording of Verdi's Requiem, which was a famous one with Leontine Price and U.C. Burling. I think it was one of her first recordings and one of his final recordings. And we listened to it from beginning to end in our country home up in Canada. And by the end of that 2-hour experience, I was completely changed. It was really like a requiem mass for my childhood or something. Like I was far more, I don't know, I don't want to say melancholic, but I was definitely more intense and definitely sadder in a way. And so the next day I just started, searching really kind of passionately for opera and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, it's a huge piece, not to start with.
Yeah. Well, it's it's interesting because it is very, I think it also tied into a few other things in my life. One being that, Quebec, where I was brought up, it was very Catholic. Not so much when I was a kid, but when my mother was in the 50s, it was incredibly Catholic. And there was still a lot of that heaviness of the church. So I could relate to the Requiem, to the Mass. But also at that time, AIDS was killing so many gay men, and I knew I was gay, and so death was sort of around as well. So between death, Catholicism, and opera, I had no chance.
Yeah, such a mix. Wow. So since 2008, you decided to start focusing more on the world of opera, as a composer, Yeah. And I'm curious, why did you choose opera and not, for example, the musicals that perhaps are closer to pop music?
Yeah, well, I actually am writing musicals now. I'm very excited about that voyage that I will be taking. But I think what I felt is that if, because opera has always been my #1 passion, really, it's where I get a lot of my inspiration and power. I felt I didn't want to be in a situation where I was a lot older and I had never written my opera. I'd always regretted not taking the time. So I said, well, let's write the opera first, a couple of operas. I'd like to write 3 actually, but just so that, so there's no regrets. So I'm not, in my 70s and wondering, when I'm going to write it.
Okay.
So it was more of a kind of a strategic plan.
Okay,
for that.
I see. And you sometimes said that you don't do pop opera. You do opera, like grand opera. However, there are pop references in your operas in the same way that there are opera references in your pop songs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my first opera, Prima Donna, there's one piece in particular, the final aria, Les Feux d'Artifice, which I sing, you know, as a pop song myself. And even in Hadrian, there's a melody that I can sing as more of a pop melody. I don't think I think it's impossible to totally divide the two. They will affect each other. But that being said, yes, when I write an opera, I'm very, very conscious of the kind of traditional, you know, requirements, you know, mainly that, you know, it can't be, you know, you can't use microphones.
Yeah.
Also, you know, so you can't have the orchestra kind of take over the singers. Also, that you know, the drama really has to be, you know, paramount. You know, you have to respect the drama, and also respect the director too, a little bit. So it's very different, but the pop will always be in there a little bit. A melody is a melody.
Yeah, of course. But I understand it's different, no? Because you work with a team.
Yeah.
In the opera. And about your second opera, it has been 20 years or more since you read the Margaret Yourcenar's book,
Yes.
Memories of Hadrian, which was the first contact you had with the story.
Yes.
Could you say what difference you have noticed between that first moment of reading Yourcenar's book and now that you made the story slightly yours?
Yeah. Well, you know, Hadrian was the idea. The first idea that I had for an opera was Hadrian, many years ago, and I had read Margaret's book, Yourcenar's book, loved it, thought that this would make a great opera. But I also knew that you know, having, you know, dropped out of music school and spent most of my energy, you know, on going to bars and hanging out with, you know, crazy people, I wasn't necessarily prepared to tackle the Roman Empire with my first opera. So I kind of waited a little bit, and then the idea of Prima Donna came, my first opera, and that to me was much more kind of manageable, you know, because I could sort of, I don't know, it was much more intimate, and it was a story with like 4 people and so forth. So I then first wrote that opera, but then, you know, and that was where I really learned how to orchestrate and learned how to, you know, compose, and so, you know, then it came time to write Hadrian, and thankfully, you know, Alexander Neef, who is now at the Paris Opera, he was at the Canadian Opera Company, he heard this story, and he said, well, I will, you know, produce your Hadrian in Toronto. So I was very fortunate to have that happen, and you know, it's the story itself. It's not based on the book of Margaret Yourcenar. I mean it's influenced by the book, but I also studied a lot about that period in history. I went to visit the Tivoli or Hadrian's villa in Tiber. So it became sort of a amalgamation, shall we say, of many influences, and you know, and also Daniel McIver, the librettist, was also very, very central, and you know, really figuring out the drama of the opera, which is very unique. Our story is very unique.
Yes.
It's not, you know, we really wanted to create a kind of, and when I say typical, I mean it in the most loving way, but like a typical operatic kind of situation, where you have like a murder, and you have, you know, a love triangle, and you have, you know, and you have, you know, ghosts and stuff. So
yes. Because one of the next questions, they were related with the story itself, no? Because you say that there are influences, but I see, for example, in the book of Yourcenar, she highlights the complex personality of the emperor, and you are really focused on the love story with Antinous.
Yes,
Why you choose this topic?
Yeah. Well, I think that it was, you know, I think, as I said before, you know, I am very influenced by opera in general. I always have been, and one of my favorite things about it is that you can also kind of do what you want, in the sense that we all know in opera there's so many historical operas, especially when you think of, you know, Donizetti, or if you think of, you know, War and Peace by Prokofiev, or different ones, or Boris Godunov, or whatever. There's so where, because I know it, for some reason, because it's like an operatic concept, it's sort of this big, larger than life situation, you can really just start to create your own story, your own ideas, and make something that is completely almost divorced from what probably really happened, And what's fabulous about the story of Hadrian is that, it's kind of sad too, but because he was so overtly homosexual, like most emperors had, boyfriends, but they were much younger, and Hadrian was really in love with Antinous, and they were like a couple, and when Antinous died, someone wrote at the time, like, the emperor wept like a woman, and that was a terrible thing to say about the emperor. So a lot of his history was destroyed by for many years because of this relationship. And it's sad, but for me it was good, because then you can invent all this stuff. Yes. You could, and there's like no way to prove, it didn't happen, So it's kind of a good, and that's the same, like, especially if you look at, Donizetti, like with the three queens and stuff.
Yeah.
All of that is pretty much, fantasy. But I like that about opera. You can do that still.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, about the composition process,
yes.
Where do you begin to characterize a character through music?
Yeah.
So, do you think about giving a musical theme to each character, or do you prefer giving them to the emotions they live in the story?
Well, that's a good question. I have several sort of tricks that or almost I should say traps that I plant, around the territory, and one of them is that there are certain themes that come up which relate to certain characters, and that's very how can I say this, very ephemeral, very kind of philosophical. It's nothing concrete. Yeah. But then what I tend to do, very much like a tent, if you're putting up a big tent, I start to really work on major sections that are quite far from each other, like the beginning, the end of the first act, maybe some big aria in the third act, and then and maybe the end as well. So you kind of raise these poles, and then you try to connect, the dots a little bit, and the themes, that there are themes that I've already composed, and then there's themes that just sort of arise out of the creative process, and then also there's things you have to not use and put away, and which is always difficult. So. But I very much, for me, it's like putting up a tent, the whole thing.
Okay, because I thinking to give a musical theme to Hadrian, that is like a kind of the main character, no? It's too difficult, huh?
Yeah. Well, I have, it's very interesting, because for instance, I had a whole, and this has happened a couple of times actually, where oftentimes I'll write a whole scene or an aria for the main character when they first arrive, and you first see them and they kind of express something that's kind of their personality. And, but very often that is removed, because you've set up this person, but then that person does their thing, and then and in a weird way at the end you don't have to set it up anymore, because they're just, it becomes less obvious. Yeah. So yeah. So a lot of opera is about removing stuff, so that you can make the what's there more intense and more dramatic.
Yeah, you have to choose.
Yes, you have to choose. And especially in practical ways, like with timing, with how much money it costs, and rehearsals, and
absolutely,
and so forth. So
yeah. Okay. And about the libretto,
yes.
In your previous opera, Prima Donna, you wrote the libretto yourself.
Yes.
Why have you decided on this occasion trusting the adaptation of Daniel Makian?
Well, my first libretto, I co-wrote it with a friend of mine, Bernadette Colomine, and so we wrote it together. It's in French, my first opera, and And I felt I needed, even I do speak French pretty well, but I felt like I needed someone who really understood, you know, the grammar perfectly. So, and Bernadette does, and she has a great poetic side too. So we had fun doing that. But in a way, I don't think, actually, I'm very happy with that project, and I'll always love that opera, actually. But what I needed for the second opera was a bit more of a kind of conflict with the librettist. You know, that is actually a very traditional relationship between a composer and a librettist, that they don't necessarily, you know, see eye to eye all the time. So, and that is exactly what happened with Daniel and I. You know, we started working, and I had my ideas, he had his ideas, and there was a lot of battles. And even there was even some points early on when we thought, like, forget it, you know, this isn't going to work. It's too difficult. But we kept, you know, fighting. I will say there's a woman named Corey Ellison who was our dramaturg, and she was really helpful. She came in and was able to negotiate, and then we started to get into a rhythm. But in the end of the day, I was very happy about that, because it was, as I said, composers have always had battles with their librettists. You know, whether it's Strauss and Hoffmann, is it Hoffmann still? Yeah, and you know, Puccini and his people, and Verdi and his people. You know, that you need a sort of, that has to be a kind of prickly relationship, because then, you know, the best wins. You know, I mean, it's whether it's the words or the music, there is this kind of winner of the competition. So I needed that.
Yeah, and I think these kind of battles are good to grow up then.
Yes, and also, well, they're good to grow up, and they're also very good in terms of the composer, and I think also the librettist, really deciding to choose their battles. Yeah. You're like, what am I really going to fight for? Absolutely. And what am I going to be like, okay, what am I going to be able to negotiate? So it's a good process. Yeah.
Okay. And about the using of Mapplethorpe's photographs as a stage material, what could you tell us?
Well, that's very much my husband's idea. Okay. Jorn Weisbrot, my husband, we've been married now for 10 years, and but he studied opera directing in Berlin, and he was actually working at the Staatsoper in Berlin when we first met. So we've always shared a real passion for opera, and he also went off to run some festivals, and he worked with Robert Wilson for many years. So he's very, you know, very knowledgeable and very kind of educated, really, in terms of the world of opera. But he hasn't directed anything for many years. So because we work together now on my career, but anyways, but this seemed like a really wonderful opportunity to get back into directing, and for him to get back into that creative process, and he came up with the idea of using the Robert Mapplethorpe images, and I've really been letting him do it on his own. I mean, I'm so excited. I've heard that it's gorgeous. I don't want to see it much until the performance, because actually some people have told me that it's very moving, and he's so passionate about it, and it's very beautiful. It's, you know, I love to see him creative like this, and I think he's very satisfied by that. But I think one of the main reason that he chose Mapplethorpe is that there are so many parallels in terms of Mapplethorpe's subject matter to Hadrian the opera. You know, Mapplethorpe, of course, loved the male body. He was and he loved the classical world. You know, some of his most famous photographs are actually of Antinous Mapplethorpe that he took, and then he also really loved powerful women. Okay. And there's a lot of very powerful women in this opera, and so which is important to bring up as well. So I think it's this. There's a correlation between the story and his images, and also there's a kind of similar between Mapplethorpe and I. There's a similar theory in the sense that we're both, you know, contemporary. We're both living today, and we're both, you know, you know, I wouldn't say cutting edge necessarily, but we're both, you know, in tune with what's going on in the world. But we're also incredibly old-fashioned. Yeah. We love the classics, you know. Okay. So it's that double edged sword, shall we say, between being very modern and also very old-fashioned.
Okay, I see. Nice idea.
Yeah.
Okay, and what differences have you felt in your way of composing your second opera compared to the first time you did it with prima donna?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I am amazed that I composed Hadrian, I have to say. I mean, I really, I mean, with prima donna, I had a very sort of, how can I say this? I had a real concept of what I needed to deliver, you know, like some beautiful arias, maybe like a quartet, you know, at some point, and some really nice orchestration, and so it was a lot, and it was very intense, and it was a lot of work. But I could sort of imagine, you know, the road, you know, it was conceivable. But then with Hadrian, it was like, oh my God, we have a chorus, we have 4 acts, we have, you know, the destruction of this, we have a murder, we have, you know, there were these huge kind of movements, the situation with the Jews, and you know, and Palestine, and so forth. So I just, I don't know, I just kind of buckled my seatbelt and just started doing it, and really was, I don't know, I really feel kind of blessed by this music that, yes, it was so hard to do, and it took so much time. It took, you know, 6 or 7 years, you know, to really get it going, but it came, and I feel like in a strange way, Hadrian for me is a real testament to the concept of the artist just believing that it'll happen, you know, and not necessarily knowing how to do it, but just having this faith that it must exist, you know, these characters, this work. So yeah, and it is, and also just practically, it is kind of this idea that humans, you know, if you really put your mind to something, if you really say like, okay, I don't know, I want to build like a cathedral, but I don't know how to do that, but if I work, you know, 5 hours a day, just do the time, it will happen. And that's a little bit how Hadrian felt. Okay. Like I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm just going to work really hard, and I believe in it, and then it happened.
Yeah, you go for that.
Yeah.
Nice. In an interview in 2016, you said that to be a good opera musician, you have to write at least 3.
Yes.
And for the moment we have 2.
Yes.
And the only thing you said about the third one is that you want it to be a comedy.
Yes.
So, could you tell us anything else?
You know what, I don't have anything to tell in that specifically. I mean, I will, you know, you mentioned at the beginning of the interview that, you know, about the musical theater world. I am very much engaged at the moment in musical theater ideas. I mean, I wrote a musical that I can't really talk about because there's going to be some announcements made soon. So, but that is completed, and it will be, you know, produced very soon, and then there's a couple of other musicals. So I'm kind of in that. Really, ever since Stephen Sondheim passed away in America, I feel like there's a lot of room now to navigate, or there should be some. You know, there needs to be an heir. I'm not saying it's me, but I might try. And so you know, that's that. But that being said, I would like to write a comedy, and maybe that is the opera that I will write when I'm in my 70s or 60s. I mean, I know that's in a long time, but I think a little bit about, you know, I always like to think about Verdi, because Verdi, as it started with Verdi, and it might end with Verdi, you know, where he wrote Falstaff at the end of his life, and there's a definite kind of you know, and especially when you think of, you know, I mean, I love Wagner and I love Verdi, I love them both, but in the end of the day, one usually says that Verdi won because his last opera was a comedy and it was fun and it was light and it was very kind of, whereas Wagner was so like, which I adore too, but you know, you kind of want to end on a comedy, I think.
Yes.
As opposed to Parsifal, which is amazing.
I understand.
But I'd rather write Falstaff than Parsifal at the end of my life.
True. I agree. And getting a bit more philosophic about this topic, what do you think is harder, make the audience laugh or cry?
Well, you know, what's funny is that I can make the audience cry with my operas I have, but I actually feel, strangely enough, that my comic sense might be the stronger gene in a weird way. I mean, what I would like to write, I mean, I don't think I would, I mean, look, just in terms of archetypes, you know, like, I don't think I would write Falstaff, but I would like to write Rosenkavalier, you know, which is laughing and crying, which has both, you know, and that is my goal, is to you know, Prima Donna was very tragic parts of it and very touching. Hadrian too has some very, very sad moments and some funny moments too. But I would like in my comedy for it to be equally as sad and happy at the same time. Sort of both of those.
Yes, as the life itself.
Yes.
I see. You have dedicated yourself overall to pop music, and it's a style widely listened by the younger generations. I'm curious about your operas. Are them for all audiences, or are they aimed for?
No. They're for all audiences. I mean, you know, when I did the opera, when Hadrian was being performed in Canada at the Opera House there, which is a beautiful opera house in Toronto, the Four Seasons Theatre. Anyways, it's a big room, you know, there's 3,000 seats at least. Anyways, and it was very well sold out pretty much every night. But when they went back to look at the receipts, to look at who had come to the opera, it was something like 80% of the audience had never been to the opera before. So whether it was younger people or people who had never been to the opera, it was a new audience. And yeah, no, I don't purposefully compose for the young people or old people, but I do feel that I feel like there is an interest from younger people that is not necessarily appreciated by the opera world. Because they'll say things like, oh, you want to come to the opera? Well, you know, we'll do it in English, or you should come see the Magic Flute. You know, I mean, I love the Magic Flute, but it's like, it's a little bit patronizing. You know, like, oh, don't come, you won't like Tristan and Isolde. And it's like, no, you should go see Tristan, you know, whatever. Like, you should, opera is about challenging the listener, you know. So, you know, it's funny because I was at Glastonbury Festival. You know that festival? It's a huge rock festival in England, and there was a young artist named Sam Fender, who's, you know, he's in his 20s and he's very good looking and he's kind of like a rock star in England, and we were hanging out backstage, and he said, oh, I want to go to the opera sometime. Take me to the opera. And it was just funny because I think a lot of young people want to go, but they're just not. I don't know, we have to bridge that gap. Yes.
And why do you think that happened, that the young people want to go, but
well, it is too expensive. True. It is too expensive. I mean, what I always wonder is why they don't have a lot of, you know, if older people who can afford to go are, you know, want to continue their, you know, that tradition, then they should buy tickets for young people. you know. So especially in today's, you know, economic climate. But you know, we'll see. I think there is a desire, and that's what's important. That's what's important.
Okay. Yeah, we have to. Go for it. So the classical world is sometimes elitist towards non-classical musicians. Have you felt a certain rejection from the most conservative classical world?
Well, it's a battle. I mean, Yeah, I mean, I think when I started out with prima donna, I was very naive in terms of what I thought the reaction would be. I really believed that suddenly I was in this, you know, rarefied environment where music mattered the most and people were, you know, were dedicated to excellence and quality and creativity and everything. But then, you know, as soon as my opera premiered, I was like, wow, there's some really mean people in the classical world who are very, very threatened and very, very closed, you know, to change. So yes, I am now more, shall we say, realistic about the classical world in terms of what they expect. And you know, look, all I can say is that, you know, I wouldn't say in any way that I've conquered the opera world. I mean, there are other composers, I think, who are more sort of, how can we say it? They're more in line with the academic kind of road, and that's great, you know, and it's fascinating to watch that. For me, though, I feel like I'm more related to kind of a traditional and also a kind of a more melodic kind of journey. And in the end of the day, some people get it and some people don't. But yet my operas are still produced, you know, and they're still performed, and people love to sing them, and the orchestras love to play them, and the conductors love to conduct them, and you know, so it's I'm still here, you know, and look, and then when you look back in history, I'm just very much part of a tradition, once again, of composers who don't have an easy time, you know, with the critics and with the establishment. So it's all, if it was so easy, if everybody was like, oh, you're so great and we love you and, you know, keep doing it, you know, then I would be a little more worried, because I think it's important to be challenged. And it is what makes classical music kind of great too, is that it is difficult to get in. So we you know, we're working on it, and it seems to be effective in the sense that you know, as I said, the works are being produced, and people seem to want to come and see them, and I'm getting commissions to write other things. So that's about all you can hope for.
And I think sometimes it's good to break the rules. Just break the rules and change things, because everything.
The way that I look at it, though, is that, and I think this is the most important thing for me, is that the opera world used to be like a tree, in the sense with many branches. You know, you had Wagner at the same time as Verdi, you had Donizetti, you had Rossini, you know, you had Offenbach, you had all these different types of composers who would write different types of operas. And they all, I don't know if they respected each other, but they all were able to exist. You know, now it's become so monolithic. You know, it's so, like, an opera has to sound like this, and it has to be, you know, atonal, it has to be hard, it has to be kind of brutal in a way, you know. And I like those operas sometimes, but I would like there to be a little more variety.
Diversity, no?
Yeah, because that's the way the opera world was. You had different types of opera houses. You know, there's opera comique, there's opera seria, and you know, different departments.
Exactly.
So I'm more into, like, just creating my own department.
I see. Good, go for it. I think, anyway, it's a risky time for opera, and I explain why. Like, pop songs last 3 minutes, and opera is 3 hours. I see that now that everything is going so fast and everything is so superficial, is focusing on opera a form of rebellion?
Well, I think it's actually probably one of opera's main advantages, is that it's totally outside of this argument of you know, the attention span, the short attention span. You know, you always have had to concentrate for a long time on opera. So I think for young people or people who are, trapped in this sort of, TikTok world where it's doomed, I think that there's my hope and my prayer really is that, and because I say this because I have a daughter who's 11, so I see that world, very intensely, that 2-second world. There has to be a side of their brain that's like, please give me more than this, even though if they don't know it, and so to sit them down and be like, no, we're gonna go watch this 5-hour-long thing, and you're gonna have to just sit through it and become more, smarter, become smarter,
exactly.
through the process, So I think it's very important. I think it's one of the main advantages of opera, that it's totally outside of the pop song concept.
Yeah, but it's complicated, no? Because it's a kind of fighting between the opera composers and the system, no? Like, I'm really worried about, for example, when someone tells you that it's impossible to read a book because it's not possible to concentrate on it.
Yeah, no, it's a little worrisome. But opera, you don't have to read it. I mean, you can read it. Obviously, there's the screen, but you're sitting there, and you have to. Look, I have found with a lot of young people when I bring them, and even my daughter. My daughter will go to the opera sometimes with us, and the music is so powerful, and the story is so kind of engaging, because a lot of these works have survived for hundreds of years, that it digs into this deeper kind of sense of humanity and history, and you can become hypnotized, So I still believe in the power of opera. And the other thing too is that it doesn't use microphones, and that's a very interesting thing in the non-technological concept, which the ears, which is very beautiful to the ear.
It's natural thing to get
So I think it's very important that opera stays and exists and makes us better people.
Yeah, of course, absolute music itself. Yeah. And you're a kind of political activist, I think, especially against the policies of the former President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Do you think that being politically positioned affect your career as an artist?
Well, I mean, look, one of my most famous songs is a political song, the Going to a Town. And I still sing that a lot, and sadly, it still has resonance, especially today. So yeah, it seems to be a part of my life. I'm just being a citizen, I'm just being someone who is concerned about, fascism and and racism and homophobia, so I don't really, and I sing about my life, so it just becomes part of that equation. Do I think it's there's been times where I've been probably affected by it. I mean, there's one kind of famous in my world where I was singing Going to a Town, and it was with an orchestra, and I started singing the song, and there's a very big trumpet part in the arrangement, and then when it came time for the trumpet to play, like nothing was there, and the trumpet player had left. He'd walked off the stage because he was a big Trump supporter, to Trump, whatever, weird. So yeah, there are I can make people angry, but that's look, I mean, it's good that they get angry because it's they're in trouble.
No, but I think with these kind of things you help to be more critical to people. I think.
Yeah, I don't know if you know about about the My Pillow guy. The Trump. There's a guy in America. He sells pillows on TV, but he's a huge Trump person, and he talks all about the election, and the Trump won and Biden didn't win. He's just, but I was reading a quote the other day from an artist from Patricia Arquette, and she was saying, oh, the next time somebody tells me like, oh, you're just an artist, you shouldn't talk about politics, or I just say, look, you're listening to the My Pillow guy.
Yeah. That's good.
Anyways, if you can understand it if you're American,
yes,
but it's
yes. Okay, I see. It's difficult, no? Because sometimes I ask to myself now this question, like, okay, you have a window to show things as an artist, but at the same time, if you are not maybe famous, it's dangerous, not to.
Yeah. I think also there is sometimes. I think there were sections of the American population which felt a little bit like stupid when artists would be like, oh, human rights and you got to care about your gay and lesbian friends, and they're like, look, we don't have any money.
Exactly.
And there was a bit of a miscommunication for years, and I think that is something that has you can't be too patronizing. If you're an artist, you have to be delicate too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So SU2C, Kate McGarrigle found, I don't know if I say it correctly, is a foundation that helps cancer patients through music.
Yes.
So how do you think music helps people?
Right. Well, my sister and I started that foundation or the fund, and the concept is that our mother, Kate McGarrigle, sadly she died from cancer. She died from sarcoma over 10 years ago, and she was a great artist, a great singer, and a great songwriter. And really, at the end of her life, she got to do a couple of big shows. One of them, a big Christmas show at the Royal Albert Hall in London, which was an amazing evening. She was very sick, but she loved performing. And both Martha and I realized that one of her greatest joys, or I wouldn't say joy necessarily, but one of her greatest sort of experiences during her illness was to write music, and was to sing, and was to kind of, forget about time a little bit, or the loss of time through, creativity. So we created these grants for people who are very sick, just to have a little bit of moment to write music or paint paintings or something that they could do creative, just to, whether it's to explore what they're going through, or whether it's to not explore, or just to like pass the time, or give them some kind of sense of a bigger of the universe, I guess. Okay. So yeah. Yeah, no, really
huge thing.
No, yes, definitely.
So, and the last question, and maybe the more personal for you, I don't know. If suddenly you're sitting in a bar and someone starts to talk about Rufus Wainwright, what would you like to hear?
That's a good question. God, I had an experience once which really affected me deeply, where I was at a radio show, and I guess there was I was going to be interviewed, and there was a big sign outside in the hallway that said, Rufus Wainwright being interviewed. And I was sitting here, and there was a hallway, and there was one person coming up this way and one person, and I could see them. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them talking. Okay. And one of them said, Rufus Wainwright. And then the person, one guy, it was the man, he went, overrated. And then the woman said, underrated. And it was sort of, for me, it was very, it really represented, I think, a little bit of my situation, where some people adore me so much and other people just do not understand. Yeah. So I think in the end of the day, maybe just, he's a lovely guy.
It's the important thing. Yeah. Okay, I see. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and well, I hope see you soon.
Yes, I will.
Y nos vemos el 29 de julio en el Festival de Peralada, en el que se estrena la segunda ópera de Rufus Wainwright, Hadrian.